Hi, welcome to today's story from Ruskin Bond's collected short stories. This evening's story is titled The Funeral. I don't think he should go, said Aunt M. He's too small, concurred Aunt P. He'll get upset and probably throw a tantrum. And Padre Lal doesn't like having children at funerals. The boy said nothing. He sat in the darkest corner of the darkened room, his face revealing nothing of what he thought and felt. His father's coffin lay in the next room, the lid fastened forever over the tired, wistful countenance of the man who had meant so much to the boy. Nobody else had mattered, neither uncles nor aunts nor fond grandparents. Least of all, the mother who was hundreds of miles away with another husband. He hadn't seen her since he was 4. That was just over 5 years ago. And he did not remember her very well. Such a sad situation. The house was full of people, friends, relatives, neighbors. Some had tried to fuss over him, but had been discouraged by his silence, the absence of tears. The more understanding of them had kept their distance. Scattered words of condolence passed back and forth like dragonflies on the wind. Such a tragedy. Only 40. No one realized how serious it was. Devoted to the child. Like that, scattered phrases. It seemed to the boy that everyone who mattered in the hill station was present. And for the first time, they had the run of the house, for his father had not been a sociable man. Books, music, flowers, and his stamp collection had been his main preoccupations, apart from the boy. A small hearse, drawn by a hill pony, was led in at the gate, and several able-bodied men lifted the coffin and maneuvered it onto the carriage. The crowd drifted away. The cemetery was about a mile down the road, and those who did not have cars would have to walk the distance. The boy stared through the window at the small procession passing through the gate. He had been forgotten for the moment, left in care of the servants, who were the only ones to stay behind. Outside it was misty. The mist had crept up the valley and settled like a damp towel on the face of the mountain. Everyone was wet, although it hadn't rained. The boy waited until everyone had gone, and then he left the room and went out onto the veranda. The gardener, who had been sitting in a bed of nasturtiums, looked up and asked the boy if he needed anything. But the boy shook his head and retreated indoors. The gardener, looking aggrieved because of the damage done to the flower beds by the mourners, shambled off to his quarters. The Sahib's death meant that he would be out of a job very soon. The house would pass on to other hands. The boy would go to an orphanage. There weren't many people who kept gardeners. These days, in the kitchen, the cook was busy preparing the only big meal ever served in the house. All those relatives and the padre too would come back famished, ready for a somber but nevertheless substantial meal. He too would be out of a job soon. but cooks were always in demand. The boy slipped out of the house by a back door and made his way into the lane through a gap in a thicket of dog roses. When he reached the main road, he could see the mountain mourners wending their way round the hill to the cemetery. He followed at a distance. It was the same road he had often taken with his father during their evening walks. The boy knew the name of almost every plant and wildflower that grew on the hillside. These and various birds and insects had been described and pointed out to him by his father. Looking northwards, he could see the higher ranges of the Himalayas and the eternal snows. The graves in the cemetery were so laid out that if their incumbents did happen to rise one day, the first thing they would see would be the giant glint of the sun on those snow-covered peaks. Possibly the site had been chosen for the view. But to the boy, it did not seem as if anyone would be able to thrust aside those massive tombstones and rise from their graves to enjoy the view. Their rest seemed as eternal as the snows. It would take an earthquake to burst those stones asunder and thrust the coffins up from the earth. The boy wondered why people hadn't made it easier for the dead to rise. They were so securely entombed that it appeared as though no one really wanted them to get out. God has need for your father. With those words, a well-meaning missionary had tried to console him. And had God, in the same way, laid claim to the thousands of men, women, and children who had been put to rest there in these neat and serried rows, what could he have wanted them for? Of what use are we to God when we are dead? Wondered the boy. Wondered the boy. The cemetery gate stood open, but the boy leant against the old stone wall and stared down at the mourners as they shuffled about with the unease of a batsman about to face a very fast bowler. Only this bowler was invisible and would come up stealthily and from behind. Padre Lal's voice droned on through the funeral service, and then the coffin was lowered. Down, deep down. The boy was surprised at how far down it seemed to go. Was that other, better world down in the depths of the earth? How could anyone, even a Samson, push his way back to the surface again? Superman did it in comics, but his father was a gentle soul who wouldn't fight too hard against the earth and the grass and the roots of tiny trees. Or perhaps he would grow into a tree and escape that way. If ever I am put away like this, thought the boy, I'll get into the root of a plant and then I'll become a flower and then maybe a bird will come and carry my seed away. I'll get out somehow. A few more words from the padre, and then some of those present threw handfuls of earth over the coffin before moving away. Slowly, in twos and threes, the mourners departed. The mist swallowed them up. They did not see the boy behind the wall. They were getting hungry. He stood there until they had all gone. Then he noticed that the gardeners or caretakers were filling the grave. He did not know whether to go forward or not. He was a little afraid. And it was too late now. The grave was almost covered. He turned and walked away from the cemetery. The road stretched ahead of him, empty, swathed in mist. He was alone. What has his father said to him once? The strongest man in the world is he who stands alone. Well, he was alone, but at the moment he did not feel very strong. For a moment, he thought his father was beside him, that they were together on one of their long walks. Instinctively, he put out his hand, expecting his father's warm, comforting touch. But there was nothing there, nothing, no one. He clenched his fists and pushed them deep down into his pockets. He lowered his head to, so that no one would see his tears. There were people in the mist, but he did not want to go near them, for they had put his father away. He'll find a way out, the boy said fiercely to himself. He'll get out somehow. That's his story. Well, that was one story. Now I've got time for another. There's still evening light. I'm sitting at the patio behind my son's house in Denver. And this story is titled The Last Truck Ride. And as you know, these stories are all from the book Collected Short Stories of Ruskin Bond. This story, The Last Truck Ride, I think it will be good. I'll finish it and then close. A horn blared, shattering the silence of the mountains, and a truck came round the bend in the road. A herd of goats scattered to the left and right. The goat herds cursed as a cloud of dust enveloped them, and then the truck had left them behind and was rattling along the stony, unpaved hill road. At the wheel of the truck, stroking his grey moustache, sat Pritam Singh, a turbaned Sikh. It was his own truck. He did not allow anyone else to drive it. Every day he made 2 trips to the limestone quarries, carrying truckloads of limestone back to the depot at the bottom of the hill. He was paid by the trip, and he was always anxious to get in 2 trips every day. Sitting beside him was Nathu, his cleaner boy. Nathu was a sturdy boy with a round, cheerful face. It was difficult to guess his age. He might have been 12 or he might have been 15. He did not know himself, since no one in his village had troubled to record his birthday. But the hard life he led probably made him look older than his years. He belonged to the hills, but his village was far away on the next range. Last year, the potato crop had failed. As a result, there was no money for salt, pepper, sugar, soap, and flour. And Nathu's parents and small brothers and sisters couldn't live entirely on the onions and artichokes, which were about the only crops that had survived the drought. There had been no rain that summer, so Nathu waved goodbye to his people and came down to the town in the valley to look for work. Someone directed him to the limestone depot. He was too young to work at the quarries, breaking stones and loading them on the trucks. But Pritam Singh, one of the older drivers, was looking for someone to clean and look after his truck. Nathu looked like a bright, strong boy, and he was taken on at 10 rupees a day. That had been 6 months ago, and now Nathu was an experienced hand at looking after trucks, riding in them, and even sleeping in them. He got on well with Pritam Singh, the grizzled 50-year-old Sikh, who had well-to-do sons in the Punjab, but whose sturdy independence kept him on the road in his battered old truck. Pritam Singh pressed hard on his horn. Now there was no one on the road, no animals, no humans. But Pritam was fond of his horn and liked blowing it. It was music to his ears. One more year on this road, said Pritam, then I'll sell my truck and retire. Who will buy this truck? Said Nathu. It will retire before you do. Don't be cheeky, boy. She's only 20 years old. There's still a few years left in her. And as though to prove it, he blew his horn again. Its strident sound echoed and re-echoed down the mountain gorge. A pair of wild fowls, disturbed by the noise, flew out from the bushes and glided across the road in front of the truck. Pritam Singh's thoughts went to his dinner. Haven't had a good meal for days, he grumbled. Haven't had a good meal for weeks, said Nathu, though he looked quite well fed. Tomorrow I'll give you dinner, said Pritam. Tandoori chicken and pilaf rice. I'll believe it when I see it, said Nathu. Pritam Singh sounded his horn again before slowing down. The road had become narrow and precipitous, and trotting ahead of them was a train of mules. As the horn blared, one mule ran forward, one ran backwards, one went uphill, one went downhill. Soon there were mules all over the place. So sad. You can never tell with mules, said Pritam after he had left them behind. The hills were bare and dry. Much of the forest had long since disappeared. Just a few scraggy old oaks still grew on the steep hillside. This particular range was rich in limestone, and the hills were scarred by quarrying. Are your hills as bare as these? Asked Pritam. No, they have not started blasting there yet, said Nathu. We still have a few trees, and there was a walnut tree in front of our house, which gives us 2 baskets of walnuts every year. And do you have water? Asked Pritam. There is a stream at the bottom of the hill, but for the fields we have to depend on the rainfall. And there was no rain last year. Oh, it will rain soon, said Pritam. I can smell rain. It is coming from the north. Yes, it will settle the dust, said Nathu. The dust was everywhere. The trunk was full of it. The leaves of the shrubs and the few trees were thick with it. Nathu could feel the dust near his eyelids and on his lips. As they approached the quarries, the dust increased. But it was a different kind of dust now. Whiter, stinging the eyes, irritating the nostrils. Limestone dust hanging in the air. The blasting was in progress. Pritam Singh brought the truck to a halt. Let's wait a bit, he said. They sat in silence, staring through the windscreen at the scarred cliffs about 100 yards down the road. There were no signs of life around them. Suddenly the hillside blossomed on outwards, followed by a sharp crack of explosives. Earth and rock hurtled down the hillside. Nathu watched in awe as shrubs and small trees were flung into the air. It always frightened him, not so much the sight of the rocks bursting asunder, but the trees being flung aside and destroyed. He thought of his own trees at home, the walnut, the pines, and wondered if one day they would suffer the same fate, and whether the mountains would all become a desert like this particular range. No trees, no grass, no water, only the choking dust of the limestone quarries. Pritam Singh pressed hard on his horn again to let the people at the side know he was coming. Soon they were parked outside a small shed where the contractor and the overseer were sipping cups of tea. A short distance away, some laborers were hammering at chunks of rock, breaking them into manageable blocks. A pile of stones stood ready for loading, while the rock that had just been blasted lay scattered about the hillside. "Come and have a cup of tea," called out the contractor. "Get on with the loading," said Preetham. "I can't hang about all afternoon. There's another trip to make, and it gets dark early these days." But he sat down on a bench and ordered 2 cups of tea from the stall owner. The overseers strolled over to the group of laborers and told them to start loading. Nathu let down the grid at the back of the truck. Nathu stood back while the men loaded the truck with limestone rocks. He was glad that he was chubby. Thin people seemed to feel the cold much more. Like the contractor, a skinny fellow who was shivering in his expensive overcoat. To keep himself warm, Nathu began helping the laborers with the loading. "Don't expect to be paid for that," said the contractor, for whom every extra paisa spent was a paisa of his profits. "Don't worry," said Nathu. "I don't work for contractors. I work for Preetham Singh." "That's right," called out Preetham. "And mind what you say to Nathu. He is nobody's servant." It took them almost an hour to fill the truck with stones. The contractor wasn't happy until there was no space left for a single stone. Then 4 of the 6 laborers climbed to the pile of stones. They would ride back to the depot on the truck. The contractor, his overseer, and the others would follow by jeep. "Let's go," said Preetham, getting behind the steering wheel. "I want to be back here and then home by 8 o'clock. I'm going to a marriage party tonight." Nathu jumped in beside him, banging his door shut. It never closed properly unless it was slammed really hard, but it opened at a touch. Preetham always joked that his truck was held together with sellotape. He was in good spirits. He started his engine, blew his horn, and burst into a song as the truck started out on the return journey. The laborers were singing too as the truck swung around the sharp bends of the winding mountain road. Nathu was feeling quite dizzy. The door beside him rattled on its hinges. "Not so fast," he said. "Oh," said Preetham, "and since when did you become nervous about fast driving?" "Since today," said Nathu. "And what's wrong with today?" "I don't know. It's just that kind of day, I suppose," said Nathu. "You are getting old," said Preetham. "That's your trouble." "Just wait till you get to be my age," said Nathu. "No more cheek." This all banter. They are just talking. Nathu is much younger. Preetham is so much older. "So, no more cheek," said Preetham, and stepped on the accelerator and drove faster. As they swung round a bend, Nathu looked out of his window. All he saw was the sky above and the valley below. They were very near the edge, but it was always like that on this narrow road. After a few more hairpin bends, the road started descending steeply into the valley. "I'll just test the brakes," said Preetham, and jammed down on them so suddenly that one of the laborers almost fell off at the back. They called out in protest. "Hang on," shouted Preetham, "you're nearly home." "Don't try any shortcuts," said Nathu. Just then, a stray mule appeared in the middle of the road. Preetham swung the steering wheel over to his right, but the road turned left, and the truck went straight over the edge. As it tipped over, hanging for a few seconds on the edge of the cliff, the laborers leapt off the back of the truck. The truck pitched forward as it struck a rock outcrop. The door near Nathu burst open. He was thrown out. Then the truck hurtled forward, bouncing over the rocks. turning over on its side and rolling over twice before coming to rest against the trunk of a scraggy old oak tree. Had it missed the tree, the truck would have plunged a few 100 feet down to the bottom of the gorge. Two laborers sat on the hillside, stunned and badly shaken. The other two had picked themselves up and were running back to the quarry for help. Nathu had landed on a bed of nettles. He was smarting all over, but he wasn't really hurt. His first impulse was to get up and run back with the laborers. Then he realized that Pritham was still in the truck. If he wasn't dead, he would certainly be badly injured. Nathu skidded down the steep slope, calling out, "Pritham, Pritham, are you all right?" There was no answer. Then he saw Pritham's arm and half his body jutting out of the open door of the truck. It was a strange position to be half in and half out. When Nathu came nearer, he saw Pritham was jammed in the driver's seat, held there by the steering wheel, which was pressed against his chest. Nathu thought he was dead, but as he was about to turn away and clamber back up the hill, he saw Pritham open one blackened, swollen eye. It looked straight up at Nathu. "Are you alive?" whispered Nathu, terrified. "What do you think?" Pritham asked. He closed his eye again. When the contractor and his men arrived, it took them almost an hour to get Pritham out of the wreckage of his truck, and another hour to get him to a hospital in the town. He had a broken collarbone, a dislocated shoulder, and several fractured ribs. But the doctor said he was repairable, which was more than could be said for the truck. "The truck is finished," said Pritham when Nathu came to see him a few days later. "Now I'll have to go home and live with my sons. But you can get work on another truck." "No," said Nathu, "I am going home too." "And what will you do there?" "I'll work on the land. It's better to grow things on the land than to blast things out of it." They were silent for some time. "Do you know something?" said Pritham finally. "But for that tree, the truck would have ended up at the bottom of the hill, and I wouldn't be here, all bandaged up and talking to you. It was the tree that saved me. Remember that, boy?" "I'll remember," said Nathu. That's the story. It was a nice story. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just showing the view of the mountains, since we are talking about the mountains. That's the high mountains right there. Enjoy.